So we'll continue then in the wide, signless ether of the self. Of course, the ether is known as the regions of space beyond the atmosphere of the earth. And of course, in ancient and medieval civilizations, it's composed of the moon, the stars, the planets. Some call it a hypothetical medium, formerly believed to permeate all space. And science still does not quite have this concept of the ether that is another sense altogether, a sixth sense and more. Now, Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the word self. And I don't know that we've done self. Have we, Vladimir?
We have done self before, but it's always, very powerful. It's
well, let's
most
do it.
Central.
Yeah, could someone read that?
Yeah,
Good.
I could read. Sri Aurobindo, the self is our self-existent being. Essays on the Gita. The self is being, not a being. By self is meant the conscious, essential existence, one in all. Letters on Yoga. In relation to the individual, the supreme is our own true and highest self, that which ultimately we are in our essence, that of which we are in our manifested nature. A spiritual knowledge, moved to arrive at the true self in us, must reject, as the traditional way of knowledge rejects, all misleading appearances. It must discover that the body is not our self, our foundation of existence. It is a sensible form of the infinite. The synthesis of yoga. Our highest self, which possesses and supports this universal power, the divine will, is not our ego self, not our personal nature. It is something transcendent and universal, of which these smaller things are only form and flowing surface. The synthesis of yoga. The self is a fundamental aspect of Brahman, but with a certain stress on its impersonality, the life divine. As soon as we become aware of the self, we are conscious of it as eternal, unborn, unembodied, uninvolved in its workings. It can be felt within the form of being, but also as enveloping it, as above it, serving its embodiment from above, adhyaksha. It is omnipresent, the same in everything, infinite and pure, and intangible forever. This self can be experienced as the self of the individual, the self of the thinker, doer, enjoyer. But even so, it always has this greater character. Its individuality is at the same time a vast universality, or very readily passes into that. And the next step to that is a sheer transcendence, or a complete and ineffable passing into the absolute. The self is that aspect of the Brahman in which it is intimately felt as at once individual, cosmic, transcendent of the universe. The realization of the self is the straight and swift way towards individual liberation, a static universality, a nature transcendence. At the same time, there is a realization of self in which it is felt not only sustaining and pervading and enveloping all things, but constituting everything and identified in a free identity with all its becomings in nature. Even so, freedom and impersonality are always the character of the self. There is no appearance of subjection to the workings of its own power in the universe, such as the apparent subjection of the Purusha to Prakriti. To realize the self is to realize the eternal freedom of the spirit from the life divine. How can a spirit entity be enclosed in a material gland? So far as I know, the self or spirit is not enclosed in the body. Rather, the body is in the self. When we have the full experience of the self, we feel it as a wide consciousness in which the body is a very small thing, an adjunct, or a thing contained, not a container. From Letters on Yoga. It is the soul, the inner being, that is the true self in everyone. Letters on Yoga.
These last two are so very important. Of course, they're all important. And you know, this aspect of the body and the self or spirit not enclosed in it, but the body is in the self. It just takes our comprehension so high to see that this body is just a little speck in the immensity of the universe. And yet, it is a divine speck. And it is the divine. So extraordinary. Sri Aurobindo gives us this.
By the way, this word "self" is used in the Vedic way here. Yes, you will not find this word used so often. In the philosophy, you will find "being" with capital B, but not the self.
Yes.
And this is Sri Aurobindo's usage. He takes Atman as self, and it totally fits here because Atman is self. And self can be on every level, yeah, as he says here in these quotations. That can be on the level of the material, it is self. Our body is the self. And there is vital body, it is the vital self. There is the mental self, supramental self, transcendental self, and this is one self, which is kind of, so this is the discovery in the Upanishads, and he is utilizing it and capitalizing itself, self and the spirit. He constantly uses these two, self and spirit.
Yes.
So we'll continue then. I think we've done silence before. In the wide, signless ether of the self, in the unchanging silence, white and nude. Silence again here is capitalized. Aloof, resplendent like gold, dazzling suns, veiled by the ray no mortal eye can bear. The spirit's bare and absolute potencies burn in the solitude of the thoughts of God. Wow. Now, I don't think we've done spirit, have we?
We did, but these are fundamental, self and spirit. Maybe we should do the spirit.
Yes. Okay, let's do it, because this Atman and self, very, very important. Huh? So can someone read spirit from Sri Aurobindo? It's on 346 in my section.
The spirit, the principle of conscious life, the vital principle in humans, animating the body or mediating between body and soul. A supernatural being. 3, the essential of anything. 4, an attitude or principle that inspires, animates, or pervades thought, feeling, or action.
It's from the dictionary.
This is
Yeah.
a dictionary definition, yes.
Should
And
I read Sri Aurobindo's?
Yes.
I think it's more important. Yes.
Okay. Sri Aurobindo. The spirit is the consciousness above mind, the Atman or self, which is always in oneness with the divine, from Letters on Yoga. What we mean by spirit is self-existent being with an infinite power of consciousness and unconditioned delight in its being, from Essays on the Gita. The spirit is an essential entity or consciousness which does not need to think or perceive, either in the mental or the sensory way, because whatever knowledge it has is direct or essential knowledge, from Letters on Yoga.
This is very, very important, isn't it? Does not need to think or perceive even in the mental or the sensory way, because its knowledge is direct or essential. Carry on.
Spirit is the soul and reality of that which we sense as matter. Matter is a form and body of that which we realize as spirit, from the Life Divine. The nature of the spirit is a spacious inner freedom and a large unity into which each man must be allowed to grow according to his own nature, the human cycle. Spirit is the crown of universal existence. Matter is its basis. Mind is the link between the two. Spirit is that which is eternal. Mind and matter are its workings. Spirit is that which is concealed and has to be revealed. Mind and body are the means by which it seeks to reveal itself, from the Synthesis of Yoga. The spirit is the supreme being in his infinite consciousness, and the supreme nature is the infinity of power or will of being of the spirit, from Essays on the Gita. The spirit is the truth of our being. Mind and life and body in their imperfection are its masks, but in their perfection should be its molds, from Essays in Philosophy and Yoga. Spirit is a final evolutionary emergence because it is the original involutionary element and factor, the Life Divine.
Thank you. Now, Sri Aurobindo uses the word potency. The spirits bear and absolute potencies. Potencies are efficacies, effectiveness, strengths, the capacity for growth and development. So we have the spirits bear and absolute potencies, burn in the solitude of the thoughts of God. A rapture and a radiance and a hush, delivered from the approach of wounded hearts, denied to the idea that looks at grief, remote from the force that cries out in its pain, in his inalienable bliss, they live. Vladimir, perhaps you can say a few words from Vedic understanding here. It's very important, you see, what is happening here, what Sri Aurobindo is describing. These bare and absolute potencies of the spirit.
Right. Well, if we compare it with the Indian philosophy, Brahman and Atman, Brahman is the spirit, Atman is the self. So in other places, Sri Aurobindo describes their relations. They are actually made Brahman is Atman, Atman is Brahman, but still there is a difference between the two. And that difference is very subtle because Atman is as if a self-awareness of Brahman, as it were. If you can, Brahman is the existence, consciousness, bliss, and Atman is the existent, conscious, blissful. Now, of course, they are one and the same, but there is that shift of the view or the attitude, or one is more conscious of his own, so to say, nature or his own being. Other is the being without even necessity to be conscious of it. That's why in the Upanishads there is a description of Brahman, that Bhrigu, son of Varuna, discovered Brahman one step by step. First he discovered that Brahman is matter. Then he discovered that Brahman is prana. Prana, the whole world, everything what is pranic, yes, is Brahman. That Brahman is the mind, not the mental being. And then Brahman is supermind. And then Brahman is Ananda and beyond. So basically all this is Brahman. Everything, all the material from which everything is made is him, Brahman. But the self-awareness within it is Atman.
Yes.
Narad?
Yes.
Excuse me. I have a little explanation here that was offered once by Dr. Alok Pandey. Can I go ahead and share that?
Surely.
He said that aloof, resplendent like gold, dazzling suns, this is veiled by the ray no mortal eye can bear. He said the spirit's potencies here was a reference to the great supramental gods that guard the doorway to the sun, to the resplendent sun. These are the true gods, like Varuna, Mitra. And he said there are 4 of them, and they guard the doorway to the great spiritual sun. They are the supramental gods. That was his explanation here, Kip.
The guardians of the light.
Yes, the guardians.
The guardians of truth, the Varuna, Mitra, Yaman, and Bhaga, yes. And they correspond, Varuna corresponds to the vastness and purity of the divine being, Sat. Mitra, of the luminosity of the divine consciousness, Chit. And Aryaman is the divine power, yes, Tapas. And Bhaga is the divine bliss, basically. So we have these 4 who are the guardians of light. And the great Adityas. Adityas are the faculties or the sons of the Divine Mother, Aditi, of that infinite consciousness power.
Excellent, yes. So we then have delivered from the approach of wounded hearts, denied to the idea that looks at grief, remote from the force that cries out in its pain. In his inalienable bliss they live. Now, inalienable is inviolable, not to be possibly repudiated. So we see that these gods cannot be moved by forces that cry out in pain, ideas that look at grief, because they are delivered from the approach of wounded hearts. Now, Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the word idea here. And idea for Sri Aurobindo is extremely important. He often calls it real idea. And perhaps someone could read idea, and maybe, Vladimir, you could give us a little more background in this idea or real idea or creative idea, this power of conscious force.
I think we read it last time, no?
I think we did. Yes, we did.
Just last time it was, and it was about the truth ideas. Rabindra sometimes says that.
And I think it's important that everybody sort of tick off what we have read. Sometimes we should read it again, but not always. Especially, we're going to find matter occurring so many, many times, force occurring so many, many times, mind, nature, power, thought, force. So, yes, tick off what we've read, and we won't go over them again and again. And now they are remote from the force that cries out in its pain. And I think we've done force already, have we not?
Yes.
But we haven't done will, to my knowledge. Have we done will?
Long ago, yes, we did. But we can look into will again, yes.
Okay. Someone could read will from Sri Aurobindo.
Sri Aurobindo. Force of being in conscious action is will, from the Life Divine. The energy that creates the world can be nothing else than a will, and will is only consciousness applying itself to a work and a result, the Life Divine. Will is the pressure of a conscious force on nature, from Letters on Yoga. What becomes desire in the ego is will in the spirit, from the Life Divine. The real motive power of the life of the soul is will. Desire is only a deformation of will in the dominant bodily life and physical mind. The essential turn of the soul to possession and enjoyment of the world consists in a will to delight, and the enjoyment of the satisfaction of craving is only a vital and physical degradation of the will to delight. It is essential that we should distinguish between pure will and desire, between the inner will to delight and the outer lust and craving of the mind and body, from the Synthesis of Yoga. The leader of the journey, the captain of the march, the first and most ancient priest of our sacrifice is the will. This will is not the wish of the heart or the demand or preference of the mind, to which we often give the name. It is that inmost, dominant, and often veiled conscious force of our being and of all being, tapas, shakti, shraddha, that sovereignly determines our orientation, and of which the intellect and the heart are more or less blind and automatic servants and instruments. From the Synthesis of Yoga. Will is conscious power and conscious act of force of being, the Life Divine. The Mother. Will, power of consciousness turned towards effectuation. Words of the Mother. MCW, Volume 14.
It's interesting that Sri Aurobindo speaks of this will not being the wish of the heart. And Mother often cautions us about the heart, that it can be misleading. There can be a desire of the heart. And that is why they speak of the psychic being as being behind the heart, in the center of the chest, not the heart. So we are run out of time. So we'll finish with that. Can someone read us the complete lines where we began today? Who could do that? Someone else could do that for us? Sanjana or Varsha?
Yes, Naraji, I can read it.
Okay.
In the wide, signless ether of the self, in the unchanging silence, white and nude, aloof, resplendent like gold dazzling suns, veiled by the ray no mortal eye can bear, the spirits bare and absolute potencies burn in the solitude of the thoughts of God. A rapture and a radiance and a hush, delivered from the approach of wounded hearts, denied to the idea that looks at grief, remote from the force that cries out in its pain. In his inalienable bliss they live. Should I go on or?
I think we finished with
Yes.
burn in the solitude of the.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Immaculate in self-knowledge and self-power, calm they repose on the eternal will. Only his law they count and him obey. They have no goal to reach, no aim to serve. Implacable in their timeless purity, all barter or bribe of worship they refuse. Unmoved by cry of revolt and ignorant prayer, they reckon not our virtue and our sin. They bend not to the voices that implore. They hold no traffic with error and its reign. They are guardians of the silence of the truth. They are keepers of the immutable decree.
A very, very fine reading.
Thank you, Naraji.
Absolutely beautiful. So we will meet again next week. Namaste all, and thank you so much.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Naraji. Namaste.